They told her the lot was worthless, but one strange detail made her dig anyway. The fence leaned like it had given up years ago. Weeds swallowed the ground, thick and uneven, hiding whatever used to be there. Ruth Delaney stood at the edge, staring longer than she meant to. Everyone else saw nothing, just dirt, neglect, something to sell and forget. But then she noticed it. A narrow strip where nothing grew the way it should, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she couldn't walk away. Would you have left it alone, or gone back for a closer look? The first thing Ruth Delaney noticed was how quiet it was. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. Not birds or wind or anything soft. This was the kind of quiet that settled in places people stopped caring about. She stood just outside the chain-link fence, one hand resting lightly against the cold metal. The fence leaned inward in places, bent where someone had tried to climb it years ago. A rusted warning sign hung crooked near the gate. The red letters faded until they barely said anything at all. No trespassing. Ruth read it anyway, then looked past it. The lot stretched deeper than it looked from the road. Maybe half an acre. Maybe more. Hard to tell with the weeds the way they were. Tall, dry at the tips, brushing against each other with a faint scraping sound when the breeze pushed through. Waist high on her, higher in places. Underneath, she could see pieces of broken concrete, old foundation slabs maybe, or the remains of something that had been torn down and forgotten. Off to the left, an abandoned warehouse sagged into itself, windows boarded, roofline uneven. The smell of old metal and hot asphalt hung in the air, even though the sun had started to dip behind the buildings. Ruth shifted her weight slightly. Her right knee protested, same as it had for the past 4 years. She ignored it. Behind her, a car door shut harder than it needed to. Mom. She didn't turn right away. She kept looking at the lot. I'm serious, her son said. His voice carried that tone, tight, controlled, already halfway through the conversation in his own mind. There's nothing here. You can see that. Ruth finally turned her head. David stood near the curb, keys still in his hand, 43 years old, pressed shirt, phone clipped to his belt like he couldn't risk being unreachable for more than 10 seconds. He looked out of place here. Too clean for the dust, too sharp for the silence. It's just land, he added. Bad land. Ruth looked back at the fence. It was your father's, she said. David let out a breath. Not angry. Not yet. Just tired. And now it's yours, he said, which is exactly why we should sell it, while we can. Ruth noticed that word, the way it came so easily. A truck passed on the main road behind them, tires hissing against the pavement. Then the quiet settled again. She stepped a little closer to the fence. The metal rattled softly under her hand. I don't think anyone's tried to buy it, she said. They haven't, David replied quickly. That's my point. She nodded once. Slow. That doesn't always mean something's worthless. David didn't answer right away. She could feel him watching her, trying to decide how much patience he had left. Mom, he said after a moment, softer now. You can't stay in that house by yourself. Not after everything. This doesn't help. This isn't anything you can use. Ruth didn't respond. Her eyes moved slowly across the lot, from the broken concrete, to the patches of dirt where nothing grew, to the far edge where the weeds thickened near the fence line. She had only been here twice before. Once with Calvin, years ago. He had parked out front, engine still running, and told her he needed to check something real quick. She'd stayed in the passenger seat, flipping through a magazine, not really paying attention. The second time had been last week, after the paperwork, after the lawyer slid the file across the table and said, almost as an afterthought, "There's also a parcel of land listed here." That was how it had been said. A parcel. Like it was nothing. David took a few steps closer now, stopping just behind her. "We can list the house next month," he said. "I already talked to someone, good agent. And this..." He gestured toward the lot, quick and dismissive. "We can just offload it. Even for a low price, doesn't matter. It's not doing you any good sitting here." Ruth heard him. She just didn't follow the words. Her attention had settled on something else, near the middle of the lot. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for anything in particular. A strip of ground, narrow, maybe 2 feet across. The weeds there were shorter, thinner, like they hadn't taken hold the same way. It ran in a line, not perfectly straight, but straight enough. Ruth narrowed her eyes slightly. "What?" David asked. She didn't answer. She leaned forward just a little, gripping the fence tighter now, peering through the diamond-shaped openings. The strip started near the front, then disappeared into the thicker growth toward the back. Like something had passed through there, more than once. Or like something underneath had changed the way things grew, Mom. She stepped to the right, just a few inches. The angle shifted. Now she could see it more clearly. Not random. Not natural. Her fingers tightened against the cold wire. A breeze moved through the lot again. The tall weeds swayed, brushing against each other in uneven waves. But that strip, it barely moved. David followed her gaze, squinting. "I don't see anything," he said. Ruth didn't look at him. "I think I do," she murmured. He let out a short laugh, not mocking, just impatient. "It's weeds," he said, "and dirt. That's all it is." Maybe. Ruth stayed where she was. Her eyes traced the line again, from front to back. Slowly, carefully, as if she were reading something written into the ground. Behind her, David checked his watch. "We should go," he said. "It's getting late." Ruth didn't move. For a moment, she forgot about the house, about the paperwork, about the quiet that had followed her for 3 months like something that refused to leave. There was just the lot. And that narrow strip. Something about it didn't sit right. Not wrong. Just unfinished. Like a sentence that stopped too soon. Ruth finally let go of the fence. The metal gave a small creak as her hand slipped away. She turned back toward her son. "Maybe," she said, almost to herself, "but I'd like to take one more look." David frowned. At what? Ruth glanced over her shoulder once more. At the weeds. At the broken ground. At the place no one wanted. Then back at him. "I'm not sure yet," she said. And that was the first time since Calvin died that she felt it. Not grief. Not even memory. Something quieter. A question that hadn't been there before. And once it settled in, it didn't leave. Ruth carried it home with her. The house felt different that evening. Not larger. Not emptier. Just quieter in a way she hadn't noticed before. The kind of quiet that made small sounds stand out. The hum of the refrigerator. The ticking clock above the sink. The faint creak of floorboards as she moved from room to room. She set her purse down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, not reaching for the light switch. Calvin had fixed that switch twice. It still stuck on humid days. She pressed it anyway. The overhead bulb flickered, then steadied. Dinner sat untouched on the stove, something David had brought over earlier, covered in foil. She lifted the edge just enough to let the steam out, then pressed it back down without looking inside. She wasn't hungry. Instead, she walked down the hallway toward the spare room. Calvin's room, she still thought of it. He had called it a workshop, though most of his tools were kept out in the garage. This room had always been quieter, cleaner, shelves lined with boxes, a small work table near the window, and a chair that had worn into the shape of him over the years. Ruth paused at the doorway. 3 months. That's what people said it took, like there was a measure for this kind of thing. She stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and something metallic. Oil, maybe, the kind that lingered long after the machines were gone. She crossed to the desk and pulled open the top drawer. It stuck halfway. She tugged a little harder. Inside, everything was neat. Too neat. Pens lined up, a small notebook, a handful of folded receipts held together with a rubber band that had gone brittle and snapped the moment she touched it. The receipts slipped loose across the desk. Ruth picked one up. Hardware store. Not the one near their house, not even the one across town. This one had an address she didn't recognize. She flipped to the next. Same store, different date, then another, and another. She set them side by side, smoothing the edges flat with her palm. Why drive that far? She murmured. Calvin had been practical, always had been. The kind of man who fixed things with what he already had before going out to buy something new. The kind who planned his errands down to the mile. She reached for the notebook next. Small, black cover. No label. Inside, the pages were mostly blank. Except for a few numbers. Measurements, maybe. Columns of figures written in his careful, narrow handwriting. No explanations. No titles. Just numbers. Ruth turned the page. Another set. Different arrangement. She frowned slightly. This doesn't mean anything, she said out loud, though she wasn't sure who she was answering. She closed the notebook and set it aside. Her hand brushed against something beneath it. A folded piece of paper, thicker than the receipts, worn along the creases. She unfolded it slowly. A map. County lines, back roads, small print labeling areas she hadn't thought about in years. Her eyes moved across it, then stopped. A faint circle, drawn in pencil, barely visible unless the light hit it just right. Ruth leaned closer. The circle wasn't large, just enough to mark a spot near the edge of the industrial district, near the lot. She straightened, the paper still open in her hands. "When did you draw this?" she whispered. There was no date, no note, just the circle. She folded the map back along the same lines and set it on the desk, separate from everything else. The room felt smaller now, not in size, in distance, like something that had been far away had quietly moved closer. Ruth opened the second drawer. Inside, loose tools, a tape measure, a screwdriver set, a small metal box tucked toward the back. She pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. When she opened it, there wasn't much inside. A handful of nails, a washer, and a single brass key. Ruth picked it up. It was worn smooth along the edges. Not new, not decorative. The kind of key meant to be used, not displayed. No tag, no marking. She turned it between her fingers. They had lived in this house for 32 years. There wasn't a lock in it she didn't know. She stood there, the key resting in her palm. He didn't throw things away, she said quietly. It was true. Calvin kept everything that had a purpose, even if that purpose wasn't immediate, especially then. Ruth closed the box and set it aside, keeping the key. The clock in the kitchen ticked louder now. She could hear it all the way down the hallway. She walked back slowly, the map and the key in her hands. At the kitchen table, she spread the map open again. Flattened it this time, smoothed the corners. Her finger traced the roads. Main Street, the old rail line, the warehouse district, then the circle. It wasn't exact. It didn't need to be. She knew the area well enough. Her gaze shifted from the map to the key, then to the window, where the last light of the day had settled into a dull gray. How many times, she asked. The question came without warning. How many times had he gone there? How many evenings had he said working late and meant something else entirely? Ruth sat back in her chair. The foil-covered dish on the stove let out a soft ticking sound as it cooled. She didn't move, didn't reach for the phone, didn't call David. This wasn't something she could explain. Not yet. Maybe not at all. Instead, she folded the map again, more carefully this time, slid it into her purse. The key followed. She turned off the kitchen light, leaving the room in shadow. Upstairs, the house settled around her, familiar, unchanged. But Ruth knew better now. There were things inside it she hadn't seen, things she had walked past for years without stopping. She stood at the bottom of the stairs, one hand resting lightly on the railing. Tomorrow, she would go back. Not to stand outside the fence, not to look, to see. And for the first time since Calvin died, the thought didn't feel like something to avoid. It felt like something she needed. Ruth didn't sleep much that night. Not because she was restless, because her mind wouldn't settle. The map sat on the nightstand, folded, still, but it might as well have been open, the way it pulled at her attention every time she turned her head. Sometime before dawn, she gave up trying. By 8, she was back in the car. The drive felt shorter this time, or maybe she just wasn't paying attention to the turns. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, but her eyes kept replaying what she'd seen. The strip of thinner weeds, the faint line running deeper into the lot. By the time she pulled up to the curb, the morning sun had burned off most of the haze. The industrial buildings looked even more worn in daylight. Rust showed clearer, paint peeled in long strips. A stray shopping cart sat tipped over near the warehouse entrance, one wheel spinning slowly in the breeze. Ruth shut off the engine. She didn't call David, didn't leave a note. She reached into her purse, feeling for the key just to make sure it was still there. Then she stepped out. The fence was the same, leaning, uncertain. The gate hung slightly open this time, just enough for her to slip through without touching it. She paused for a second. Not hesitation, just a breath. Then she stepped inside. The ground felt uneven beneath her shoes. Dry in some places, soft in others. The weeds brushed against her legs as she moved forward, leaving faint scratches against the fabric of her slacks. She didn't head straight for the strip she'd seen yesterday. Instead, she slowed down, looked, listened. There was no one else around, no traffic close enough to drown out the smaller sounds, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of something electrical far off, maybe from one of the warehouses still in use. Ruth moved deeper into the lot. The weeds thickened toward the center, taller, denser. She had to push them aside with both hands now, clearing a path one step at a time. Then she saw it again. The strip. From inside the lot, it looked different, more defined. The weeds didn't just grow thinner there, they grew shorter, as if something beneath the soil kept them from taking root fully. Ruth stepped onto it. The ground felt firmer, packed. She shifted her weight slightly, testing it. Yes, different. She took another step along the line, then another. Her eyes stayed down now, tracing the path as it moved forward. It curved slightly, not perfectly straight, but deliberate in a way that didn't belong to chance. About halfway in, she stopped. There, near the edge of the strip. Something caught her eye. A dull glint, barely visible through the dirt and dried grass. Ruth crouched carefully, her knee stiff as she lowered herself down. She brushed the weeds aside with her hand, ignoring the small cuts as they scraped against her skin. A piece of metal. No, more than that. A pipe. About an inch in diameter, sticking up just enough to break the surface. The top was capped, but not tightly. There were small perforations along the sides, evenly spaced. Ruth reached out and touched it. It was warmer than the air. Not hot, just not cold. She held her fingers there a moment longer, then pulled back slightly, studying it. "This isn't drainage," she said under her breath. "Too clean, too intentional." She leaned closer. There was a faint movement in the air around it, so slight she almost missed it. But it was there. A current. Ruth's breath slowed. She looked around the lot again. The strip, the packed ground. Now this. She sat back on her heels, her mind moving faster than her body. Ventilation. The word came to her without effort. She had seen something like it once, years ago, in a magazine article Calvin had left open on the coffee table. A piece about storm shelters, underground spaces, systems that needed air to circulate. Ruth's eyes returned to the pipe. Then slowly, she turned her head, following the strip. Where did it lead? She pushed herself up carefully, brushing dirt from her hands onto her pant legs. Her heart had started beating faster now, not from fear, from recognition. She moved again, staying on the line. 10 steps. 15. The weeds thinned slightly near the back of the lot, giving way to patches of bare earth and broken concrete. The strip widened just a little here, then curved again toward the far corner near the fence. Ruth followed, each step more certain than the last. Then she saw it. Not clearly. Not all at once, just something different about the ground. A shape. Low, subtle, covered in dirt and debris, but not natural. She stopped a few feet away. The air felt still here. Heavier. Ruth didn't move closer right away. Instead, she looked back over her shoulder, at the path she had taken, at the fence beyond it, at the street she could barely see through the tall grass, then forward again, at the spot. Her hands tightened slightly at her sides. "You didn't leave this for nothing," she said quietly. The words surprised her. She hadn't planned to say them. But once they were out, they felt right. Ruth took one more step forward, then another. She crouched again, slower this time, lowering herself carefully as her knee protested. Up close, the shape was clearer, Not large, but flat. The surface beneath the dirt felt smoother than the surrounding ground, more solid. Her fingers hovered over it, then pressed down. Wood, old but not rotted, reinforced. Ruth drew her hand back. Her breath caught, not sharply, not dramatically. Just enough, something is underneath. The thought didn't scare her. It settled in the same place the question had been. Quiet. Certain. Ruth stayed there for a long moment, kneeling in the dirt, staring at the place where the ground didn't behave the way it should. The pipe, the path, the shape beneath the surface. She didn't dig. Not yet. Instead, she stood slowly, brushing her hands off again. Her gaze moved once more across the lot, taking it all in, not as something abandoned, but as something concealed. When she stepped back onto the strip, it felt different under her feet. Not just firm, intentional. Ruth made her way back toward the fence, moving more carefully now, as if she might miss something if she rushed. At the edge, she stopped, turned, looked one last time. From here, it was just weeds again. Just dirt. Just a place no one wanted. She almost smiled. Then she stepped through the gate and back onto the sidewalk. But the lot didn't stay behind her this time. It followed. All the way home. Ruth could feel it even as she set her keys on the kitchen counter. The same quiet pull. The same unfinished feeling sitting just beneath everything else. She washed her hands at the sink. Dirt gathered along the creases of her fingers, stubborn in the lines of her skin. She scrubbed harder than she needed to. The water ran warm, then hot, then warm again as she adjusted it without thinking. When she dried her hands, she noticed something. A thin line of soil under her nails she hadn't gotten out. She stared at it for a second, then turned away. By afternoon, she was back in the car. This time she didn't hesitate when she pulled up to the curb. Didn't sit for a moment to gather herself. She stepped out, walked straight to the fence and pushed the gate open just enough to slip through. The weeds brushed against her again, but now she moved with purpose. No slow searching, no drifting. She knew where she was going. The strip, the pipe, the shape beneath the ground. Ruth followed the path without looking down this time. Her feet found it easily, as if her body had already memorized the way. When she reached the spot near the back, she stopped. The air felt still again. She stood there, looking at the ground. Then she turned, walked back toward the front of the lot. Out through the gate, across the street, to her car. From the trunk, she pulled out what she had brought this time. A pair of old work gloves, a short-handled shovel. Nothing fancy, nothing new. Things that had belonged to Calvin. She closed the trunk slowly, resting her hand on it for just a moment before lifting the shovel. "Let's see," she said under her breath. Back inside the lot, the sounds felt louder now. The scrape of the shovel against dry dirt, the snap of weeds as she pulled them free, the steady rhythm of her breathing as she worked. Ruth started where the surface felt softest. Not at the center of the shape. At the edge. Careful. Deliberate. She pushed the shovel down into the soil, using her weight to drive it in. The ground resisted at first, then gave slightly. She lifted a small section of dirt and tossed it aside. Again. And again. The work was slower than she expected. Her hands, even in gloves, felt the strain. Her shoulders tightened, Her knee complained each time she shifted her stance, but she didn't stop. Not when the sun moved higher, not when sweat gathered at the base of her neck. She kept going. After 20 minutes, the difference became clear. The soil changed, from loose to compact. The shovel struck something solid, a dull, hollow sound. Ruth froze. She lifted the shovel, then lowered it again more carefully. Tapped. There it was again. Not rock. Too even. Too clean. She dropped to one knee, brushing away the dirt with her gloved hands. The surface emerged slowly. Wood. Darkened with age, but intact. Not splintered, not warped, flat. Her breath slowed. Ruth worked the dirt away from one side, then the other, widening the space enough to see the edges. It wasn't just a board. It was a panel, set into the ground. Flush. Precise. She sat back slightly, her hands resting on her thighs. This wasn't buried, she said quietly. It was placed. The difference mattered. She leaned forward again, clearing more dirt from the top. The shape revealed itself fully now. Rectangular. Reinforced along the edges with metal strips that had rusted just enough to blend into the soil. Near the center, partially hidden beneath a thin layer of packed dirt, she found it, a small metal plate, set into the wood, with a keyhole. Ruth's hand stilled. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the opening. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket. The brass key was still there, warm from her body. Worn smooth from years of use she had never noticed. She held it between her fingers, turning it slightly so the light caught along its edges. No label, she whispered. No reason. Until now. Ruth leaned forward, brushing the last bit of dirt away from the keyhole. Her hand hovered for just a second. Not fear. Something closer to respect. Then she slid the key in. It fit. Perfectly. She didn't turn it right away. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment. Calvin's face came to her, not clearly, not sharply, but in fragments. The way he stood in doorways, the way he wiped his hands on a rag after finishing a job, the way he said, "I'll take care of it," without explaining how. Ruth opened her eyes. Her grip tightened slightly, and she turned the key. The lock gave with a soft, solid click. Not rusted, not stuck, maintained. Her chest rose and fell slowly. The sound seemed louder than it should have been in the open space. Ruth pulled the key free and set it carefully on the panel. Then she pressed her hands against the wood. It didn't move at first. She adjusted her position, bracing one foot against the ground, and pushed again. This time it shifted, just slightly. Enough. The panel wasn't nailed down. It was set in place. Weighted. Balanced. Designed to stay closed, but not permanently. Ruth slid her fingers under the edge where the dirt had been cleared. Her gloves made it harder to grip, so she pulled one off, then the other, dropping them beside her. Her bare hands found the wood again. Rough in places, smooth in others. She pulled, slow, careful. The panel lifted a few inches, then stopped. Heavy, heavier than she expected. Ruth adjusted her stance again, using both hands now, her arms trembling slightly with the effort. She pulled once more. The panel rose higher this time. A faint rush of air moved past her face. Cool. Dry. carrying a scent she recognized instantly. Wood. Not fresh-cut, but worked. Like Calvin's workshop. Ruth froze. The panel rested at an angle now, supported by her grip. She didn't lift it fully, didn't look inside. Not yet. Instead, she stood there, holding it halfway open, her breath steadying again. The lot around her was silent. No cars passing, no voices. Just the faint sound of wind moving through the tall weeds. She lowered the panel gently back into place. The wood settled with a soft thud. The key lay where she had left it. Ruth picked it up, slipped it back into her pocket. Then she sat back on her heels, her hands resting loosely in her lap. The ground in front of her didn't look like much. Just dirt, just weeds, just something people passed by without thinking. But she knew now. It wasn't empty. It had never been empty. Ruth pushed herself up slowly, brushing the dirt from her hands onto her clothes. Her body ached. Her arms felt heavy. But there was something else now, too. Certainty. Not about what was inside. Not yet. But about one thing. This wasn't an accident. She looked down at the panel one last time, then turned and walked back toward the fence. This time, when she stepped out onto the sidewalk, she didn't feel like she was leaving something behind. She felt like she had just found the edge of it. Ruth didn't go home right away. She stood beside her car, one hand resting on the roof, eyes fixed across the street. The lot looked the same as it always had. Weeds, broken ground, silence. No sign of what she had uncovered. No sign of anything at all. A man walking his dog passed at the far end of the block. He didn't glance her way. Didn't slow down. The dog tugged forward, nose low, uninterested in anything but the scent of the sidewalk. Ruth watched them disappear around the corner. Then she reached into her pocket. The key. She held it in her palm for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy, not light, just present. "You left this," she said quietly. The words didn't echo. There was nothing here to carry them. She opened the car door, then stopped, closed it again. Ruth turned back toward the lot, crossed the street, slipped through the fence. This time there was no pause, no looking around, no hesitation. She moved straight down the narrow strip, her steps steady, her breath measured. When she reached the panel, she didn't stand over it. She knelt. Brushed away the thin layer of dirt that had settled again since she left, her hands moving faster now, more certain. The shape revealed itself again. The edges, the metal, the keyhole. Ruth pulled the key from her pocket. Her fingers didn't tremble this time. She slid it in. Turned it. The same solid click. She set the key aside, then placed both hands on the panel and lifted. It resisted for a second, then gave. Heavier than before, but she was ready for it now. The panel rose slowly, scraping softly against the packed dirt around it. A breath of air moved upward. Cool. Still. It touched her face and carried something with it. Not decay, not dampness. Wood, dry wood. And something else beneath it. Oil, maybe. Or the faint trace of metal that had been handled often. Ruth held the panel open, bracing it with one arm as she leaned forward slightly. Darkness. Complete at first. Then her eyes adjusted. A shape took form. Steps. Narrow, wooden, leading down. She didn't move. Her hand tightened on the edge of the panel. The space below seemed to pull at the light, swallowing it before it could settle. Ruth let the panel rest against its hinges. It stayed open on its own. Another small detail. Not random. Designed. She reached into her purse and pulled out the flashlight she had brought without thinking. It was one of Calvin's. The kind he used in the garage when the power went out. Heavy. Reliable. She clicked it on. The beam cut through the dark, landing on the steps below. Dust moved in the air, floating slowly, undisturbed. The wood looked solid, not rotted, not broken. Ruth leaned closer, angling the light further down. The staircase curved slightly after a few steps, disappearing out of sight. She drew in a breath. Let it out slowly. This wasn't for storage, she said under her breath. Storage didn't look like this. Storage didn't have this kind of care. She shifted her position, sitting on the edge of the opening. Her feet hovered above the first step. For a moment, she stayed there, listening. Nothing. No sound from below. No movement. Just the faint whisper of air rising from the space. Ruth lowered one foot. Her shoe met the wood, solid. She tested it with her weight. No give. Then the other foot. Now she was standing on the first step, one hand still gripping the edge above. The light in her other hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of holding it steady. She looked back once, at the opening above, at the sky, at the weeds bending gently in the breeze, then down again. Ruth let go, took one step down, then another. The temperature dropped as she descended, not cold, just cooler, more contained. The air changed too. Less movement, more stillness. The beam of the flashlight moved with her, tracing the steps, the walls, the corners where dust had settled undisturbed. 5 steps, 6, 7. The light caught something along the side. A railing, simple wood, smooth where hands had passed over it again and again. Ruth reached out and touched it. Her fingers ran along the surface. No splinters. Maintained. She continued down. The sound of her footsteps changed as she went deeper, from hollow to muted. The space was opening. She could feel it. The staircase ended sooner than she expected. The beam of light pushed forward into a wider area. Ruth stepped off the last step. Her shoes met a solid floor. Wood again. Different pattern. Carefully laid. She lifted the flashlight higher. The space unfolded slowly. Not large, but not small. A room, a real room. Walls lined with vertical wooden planks. Shelves along one side. A workbench against the far wall. Tools arranged in a way she recognized immediately. Not scattered, not stored. Placed. Exactly where they belonged. Ruth didn't move for a long moment. Her breath came slow, measured. She turned in a small circle, the beam of light following her gaze. A chair, a table, a lantern hanging from a hook, everything intact, everything ready. As if someone had just stepped out and planned to return. Her chest tightened, not sharply, not painfully. Just enough. You were here, she said. The word stayed close this time, didn't travel far. Ruth took a step forward, then another. Her hand reached out, almost without thinking, brushing lightly against the surface of the table. Dust clung to her fingertips, but not much, not as much as there should have been. She looked at it, then at the rest of the room. This hasn't been left alone, she whispered. The realization settled slowly. Not all at once, piece by piece. Ruth moved deeper into the space, her light passing over each detail, taking it in, understanding it without fully knowing how. The lot above, the panel, the staircase. This. None of it was an accident. None of it was temporary. Ruth stopped in the center of the room. The beam of her flashlight steadied. Her breathing matched it, slow, even. And somewhere, beneath the quiet and the stillness, one thought pressed forward. Not confusion, not doubt. Something clearer, stronger. She hadn't just found something hidden. She had stepped into something that had been waiting. Ruth stood in the center of the room, the beam of her flashlight steady now. The space didn't feel abandoned. That was the first thing that settled in. It felt paused, like a place held in between moments. She took a slow step forward, then another. Her shoes made soft, contained sounds against the wooden floor, not echoing, not hollow, just present. The walls were clean, not polished, not decorative, but finished with care. Each plank fitted tight against the next, the grain running straight and even. Calvin's kind of work. She didn't need to see his name on anything to know. Her light moved across the shelves. Boxes, labeled in small, neat handwriting. Tools, fasteners, electrical, water. Ruth leaned closer. The handwriting was his. She could see it clearly now. Every letter precise. No shortcuts. No rushed strokes. Her fingers hovered over one of the boxes, then rested gently against the side. "You planned this," she said quietly. The words felt different down here, heavier, like they stayed in the air instead of disappearing. She moved along the shelf, her hand trailing just behind the beam of light. Everything had a place. Everything had been thought through. No clutter, no extras, only what was needed. Ruth turned toward the far side of the room. The beam of light caught the edge of something larger. A doorway. No door, just an opening. She stepped through. The space beyond was smaller. A narrow kitchen. Not decorative. Functional. A small propane stove, a metal sink, cabinets built directly into the wall. Ruth opened one slowly. Inside, canned goods, stacked, organized. Dates written in marker across the tops. Not old, not expired. She closed the cabinet, opened another. Dried goods, rice, beans, flour, sealed, protected. She stood there, the flashlight lowering slightly in her hand. "This wasn't for later," she murmured. "This was ready." The realization came quietly, but it settled deep. She stepped back into the main room. Her eyes adjusted more now. The darkness didn't feel as complete. The shapes came easier. To the right, another opening. She moved toward it. A bedroom. Simple. A bed frame built from the same wood as the walls. A mattress, still wrapped in protective plastic. A folded blanket resting neatly at the foot. Ruth stepped closer. Her fingers touched the blanket. It was clean. Soft. Unused. Her throat tightened slightly. Not enough to stop her breathing, just enough to slow it. She turned away, back into the main room. Her light moved again, slower now, taking in the details she had missed before. The wiring along the ceiling, neatly run, clipped in place, leading to a small panel mounted on the wall. Ruth stepped closer, opened it. Switches, labels, Lights. Vent. Storage. She flipped one without thinking. A soft hum answered her. Then light. Warm. Steady. It filled the room gradually, pushing the darkness back into the corners. Ruth blinked, lowered the flashlight, turned it off. For the first time, she could see everything clearly, not through a beam, not in pieces. All at once. The room looked different now. Larger, more complete, less like something hidden, more like something built to be lived in. She turned slowly in place. The table, the chair, the shelves. Everything held its position. Nothing out of place. Nothing unfinished. Her eyes landed on the table. There was something there she hadn't noticed before. Not in the dim light. Not from where she had been standing. A notebook. Centered. Closed. Ruth walked toward it. Each step measured. The closer she got, the more certain she felt. Not nervous. Not afraid. Certain. She reached the table and stopped. The notebook was plain. No decoration. Just a worn cover, edges slightly softened from handling. On the front, her name, written in Calvin's hand. Ruth. Nothing else. Her hand lifted slowly, hovered, then rested on the cover. Warm. Not from use. From the room. From everything that held the same quiet temperature. Ruth didn't open it right away. Instead, she stood there, her palm flat against the surface, her breathing steady, her eyes fixed on the letters. You knew, she said softly. Not a question. A recognition. She pulled the chair back slightly. The legs scraped gently against the floor. She sat. The movement felt natural, like she had done it before, like this place already knew her weight. The notebook remained in front of her. Waiting. Ruth lifted her hand. Then, slowly, she opened it. The first page turned without resistance. The paper was thick. Clean. The ink dark. The handwriting unmistakable. She read the first line, then stopped. Her breath caught, not sharply, but enough to hold her still. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the page. She read it again, this time slower. Every word settling into place. The room stayed quiet around her, the light steady, the air still. Ruth didn't move for a long moment, didn't turn the page, didn't look away. She just sat there, reading the first sentence again and again, letting it land, letting it take shape. Then, carefully, she turned the page and began. The first few lines were simple. No greeting, no explanation, just his handwriting. Steady, familiar. The same hand that had labeled jars in the kitchen, written notes for repairs, left reminders on the fridge when something needed fixing. Ruth leaned closer. The words didn't rush. They didn't try to explain everything at once. They unfolded. Slowly. I didn't know how to tell you, the first line read. Ruth's eyes moved over it again, not because she didn't understand, because she did. Too well. She turned the page. More writing. Dates this time. Spread out across years. Not days, not weeks. Years. Ruth's fingers pressed lightly against the paper. Her mind moved back through time, matching the dates to what she remembered. Evenings when Calvin came home later than usual. Saturdays when he said he had a few things to check. Weekends where he left early and came back quiet, tired, but never complaining. She had never questioned it. Not seriously. That was the kind of life they had built. You trusted the spaces you didn't see. Ruth kept reading. I found the place first, one entry said. Didn't look like much. That's why it worked. Her breath slowed. She could almost hear him saying it. Plain, direct, without needing more words than necessary. Another page. I started small, just clearing, measuring, making sure the ground would hold. Ruth looked up briefly, around the room, then back down. Her fingers turned the next page more quickly now. There's time if I do it right. Time. The word stayed with her. She kept reading. Page after page, each one a piece, each one a step. He had planned it. Not quickly, not impulsively, carefully, measured. The way he built everything. Her eyes caught another line. I didn't tell her. Not yet. Ruth stopped. The word her sat on the page. Simple. Clear. No confusion. She swallowed. Turned the page. I wanted it finished first. A breath left her chest. Slow. Controlled. She leaned back slightly in the chair. The wood creaked beneath her. Not from age. From use. Ruth looked down at her hands, still resting on the notebook, then back to the words. Her pace changed now. Slower. More deliberate. Not searching. Absorbing. I had the tests done today, another entry read. Ruth's brow tightened slightly. Tests. Her eyes moved quickly to the next lines. They say it's manageable, for now. The room seemed to shift around her, not physically, but in the way it settled, in the way it held the air. Ruth turned the page. Her fingers moved more carefully now. I didn't tell her. Again. Clear. Repeated. I don't want her worrying about something she can't fix. Ruth closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, then opened them again. The page in front of her didn't change. The words stayed. Still. Certain. She kept reading. They gave me time, one entry said. No one knows how much. That's not how it works. But enough. Enough. The word echoed quietly in her mind. Enough for what? Ruth turned the page. Her hands didn't shake, but they moved slower. As long as I keep building, it'll be ready. Her eyes moved across the line, then back again. Building. She looked up. At the walls. The shelves. The table. Everything around her. Then back down. I need her to have something no one can take. Ruth's breath caught this time, not sharply, but enough to hold her still. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the page. She read the line again. Slower. Every word landing. I need her to have something no one can take. Her gaze lifted, moved across the room, the kitchen, the shelves, the doorway, the bed. Everything here, everything below the ground, hidden, protected. Her eyes returned to the notebook. Another page. I know what David will do. Ruth's chest tightened slightly. She didn't look away. She didn't skip ahead. She read it. He'll try to make it easier. That's how he thinks. Practical. Efficient. He won't see this. Ruth's lips pressed together. Not in anger, not in defense, just in recognition. She kept reading. I'm not building it for him to understand. The words didn't feel harsh. They felt certain, steady, like everything else he had written. Ruth turned the page, her breathing even again. This isn't about hiding something, he wrote. It's about leaving something that can't be taken apart. She sat back slowly. The chair shifted under her weight. The room felt smaller now, not in space, in meaning. Everything had moved closer. Everything had connected. Ruth looked down at the notebook again. Her eyes traced the lines, not searching anymore, knowing. The late nights, the distance, the quiet. None of it had been empty. None of it had been neglect. It had been work. Not for himself. For this. For her. She turned another page. Slower now. Not because she didn't want to know. Because she needed to take each piece as it came. The final lines on the page were shorter, fewer words. I couldn't say it out loud. Ruth's eyes stayed on the sentence. Her hand rested flat on the paper. The light above her hummed softly, steady, constant. I didn't know how. She drew in a breath. Let it out slowly. The room didn't feel hidden anymore. It felt explained. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Enough to understand what she had missed. Ruth closed the notebook gently, not finished, but paused. Her hands rested on the cover again, her name still there, unchanged. She looked around the room once more, at everything he had built, every detail, every decision, every hour she had never seen. You didn't leave, she said quietly. The words settled into the space, didn't echo, didn't disappear. They stayed, just like everything else here. Ruth leaned back in the chair, her breathing steady now, her eyes clear. The confusion that had followed her for 3 months had shifted. Not gone, not erased, but changed. Into something she could hold, something she could see, something she could finally understand. Ruth sat there a while longer. Not reading, not moving, just letting the room settle around her in a new way. The air felt different now, not because anything had changed, but because she had. She looked at the notebook again, then at the shelves, at the tools, at the small kitchen just beyond the doorway. Everything here had been built with a purpose she hadn't known existed. Until now. Ruth stood slowly, pushing the chair back with a soft scrape. Her knee protested, but she ignored it. She stepped into the kitchen again, this time with more attention. Opened a cabinet, checked the labels more carefully. The dates, the organization, the consistency. He hadn't just stored things. He had maintained them, rotated them, kept them ready. Ruth ran her hand along the edge of the counter. Every detail, she murmured. She moved to the sink, turning the handle slightly. A low sound followed. Then water. Clear. Steady. She watched it for a moment, her hand still on the handle, then turned it off. Her eyes moved upward. The vent. She stepped back into the main room, looking toward the panel she had opened earlier. Air moved here. Quietly. Constantly. She could feel it now that she was paying attention. Not strong, but enough. Enough to keep the space alive. Ruth turned slowly, taking in the entire room again, not as something hidden, as something complete. She walked to the bed, pulled the plastic back slightly, pressed her hand against the mattress. Firm, unused, waiting. She let the plastic fall back into place. Her chest rose slowly, then fell. "I'm not leaving this," she said. The words came without hesitation. They didn't feel like a decision. They felt like recognition. Ruth stepped back into the main room, picked up the notebook, held it for a moment, then placed it carefully back on the table. Not finished, but not something to rush through. She turned toward the stairs, paused, looked back once more, at the room, at the light, at everything that had been built without her knowing. Then she climbed. Step by step. The air changed again as she rose. Warmer, less contained. The sound of the outside returning slowly. By the time she reached the top, the sunlight had shifted. Late afternoon now. The weeds moved in the breeze, the sky wider. Ruth stepped out and pulled the panel closed behind her. It settled into place with the same quiet precision. She brushed the dirt back over the edges. Not perfectly, but enough. Then she stood, looked around. No one had seen her. No one knew. The lot remained what it had always been to everyone else. Nothing. Ruth almost smiled. She walked back to her car, drove home. But the space beneath the lot stayed with her, not as a question this time, as something solid, something real. The next morning, she returned. Earlier, with a different kind of intention. She brought more than a shovel this time, a small toolbox, a cloth, a notebook of her own. She moved through the lot the same way as before, straight to the strip, to the panel, to the space beneath, each step easier, more familiar. Inside, she turned on the lights again. The hum greeted her. The room warmed slightly under the steady glow. Ruth set her things on the table, looked around. Then she got to work. She started small, wiping dust from the surfaces, checking the shelves, opening each box. Not to reorganize, to understand. She moved through the space slowly, learning it. Piece by piece. She found the electrical system, traced the wires, read the labels, tested the switches, everything worked. She checked the water again, ran it longer this time, watched the pressure, the clarity, then turned it off. Satisfied, Ruth moved into the bedroom, pulled the plastic back completely, folded it neatly, set it aside. She smoothed the blanket, adjusted the pillow. Simple things. But they mattered. By midday, she stepped back, looked at what she had done. Not much had changed, not visibly. But the space felt different. Less paused, more used. Ruth sat at the table again, opened the notebook, read a few more pages, slower now, not searching, absorbing. She closed it gently, set it aside, then opened her own. The pen felt unfamiliar in her hand for a moment, then steady. She wrote one line. Day 1. She stared at it, then added another, found it. Ruth leaned back in the chair, the light above her steady, the room quiet. Not empty, not waiting. Present. Above her, the lot remained unchanged. Weeds, broken ground. Silence. Below, something else had begun. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but clearly. For the first time in years, Ruth wasn't reacting to what had been left behind. She was moving forward. Not because she had to, because she chose to. And somewhere in that choice, something settled inside her. Not loud, not overwhelming. Just steady. like everything else he had built. Ruth sat there with her notebook open, her own handwriting still fresh on the page. Day 1. Found it. She looked around again, not searching this time, just seeing. The shelves, the tools, the quiet way the air moved through the vents. Every small thing working together, the way Calvin used to fix things without ever needing to explain how. All those evenings, she thought he was just gone. All those hours she assumed meant distance. They hadn't been empty. He had been here. Making sure she would never have to ask anyone for permission to stay. Ruth rested her hand on the table, the same place his must have been 100 times before. For the first time, she didn't feel like something had been taken from her. She felt prepared. Not suddenly, not all at once. Just enough to stand where she was without looking for someone else to tell her what came next. Above her, the lot still looked like nothing. Weeds, dirt, a place people drove past without slowing down. But she knew what was underneath, and she knew why. She closed her notebook, not because she was finished, but because she finally understood where to begin. If someone looked at your life from the outside, what would they miss because they never thought to look closer?